Hey everyone, today I'm doing another skill breakdown, getting close to the end of list of characters, but today I'm gonna cover Sir Leodegrance. He is a rightful sage. You unlock him through the rightful alignment, and you actually can get access to him earlier in the game than any other sage, so he can act as the first sage you get and a bit more of an early game option. And he's very strong to have a sage that early in the game. I'm sure a lot of players out there know just how strong the support of a sage can be, how good Bless is, how good Inspire is. So being able to get him early makes a big difference for a lot of runs. And on top of that, I think he just has a really cool design, so that's always a plus. Before I get into his actual skills, I want to cover the traits real quick. He actually has some decent traits. Ambitious, he just gets extra loyalty from court titles. This isn't a huge thing, but it can help you get some of those loyalty bonuses a little sooner, a little quicker, and getting some of that extra damage, that extra AP a little bit earlier in the game can be helpful. Nothing major, but it's solid for sure. And he does have a facility title through his virtuous trait. When you appoint him as Grandmaster of the Round Table, he grants additional loyalty for other righteous characters. So being able to boost the loyalty for your righteous heroes during your righteous run, again, is useful. Being able to get some of those loyalty bonuses a little bit earlier. Not huge differences, but every bit can help. Now, for his negative trait, he has exposed, so when he gets an injury, it will always be a major injury. If you have the gold laying around to do the quick treatment, so that way it's always one mission, this isn't a big deal. There's definitely worse negative traits out there, but if you're a little more strapped for gold, because you're playing on a higher difficulty and you have more heroes going through the hospice and cathedral on a more regular basis, this may become more of a big deal. And it definitely does impact the mission you're on as well. The major injuries do have some significant debuffs, so it will make him noticeably weaker in most cases for the rest of that mission. So if you get injured early on due to some misplay, you can definitely feel that. But if you get it towards the end, obviously not as much of a problem. You just really want to be a little more careful with how you play him to try and avoid this in general. Now, as we get into the skills, some of you players that may be a little more experienced may realize that his skill tree here, it's pretty basic looking. There's nothing in his skill tree that is unique to him, and you can actually find his entire skill tree within Isolde's skill tree. So she's just kind of a direct power creep of him, so that kind of hurts. You can find about 90% of his skill tree in just the other sage's skill tree, so it's really hard for Leo to stand out and really feel unique, feel special, feel worth bringing, because a lot of the other sages just can do everything he can in some cases, or nearly everything he can, but then diversify into some other special areas. So before I get into all the skills, I do want to point out he is perfectly fine. He's sort of the base, the core sage, so you can bring him, but for me at least, there's a little incentive too. But if you're just a big Leo fan because you like his trait, you like his look, here's what he has for you. With tier 1, starting with the basic strike, 100% weapon damage, 3 AP cost, so fairly cheap attack for the one-headed weapon, that's standard. And with the upgrades on it, it can apply chill. This is probably the strongest upgrade on this ability, I think, being able to chill enemies, especially since Sage damage won't be getting kills a lot of the time. They can definitely get them. Being able to debuff the enemy into their next turn with this AP reduction is very strong. With Might, you can increase the damage somewhat at least, so the chance of getting those kills and just weakening enemies to support your main damage dealer is that much stronger. With Splinter, increase the damage against them if they're frozen. This is a very powerful damage tool, especially since sages can self-synergize off this. They have a skill to freeze an enemy. And then Draining Strike, you regain some HP. Generally, I don't really ever take this one. However, with Leo, this could be somewhat useful to help buffer his HP a bit more if you're really paranoid about taking those major injuries. To his first active skill, standard ability for the sages, we have freezing attack, amazing skill, low cooldown, only 4 AP, freeze an enemy, it's a powerful debuff. If they have no resistance, then they just lose their next turn, and if they have only partial resistance, then they'll lose a heavy amount, potentially, of their AP on the next turn, greatly lowering what they can do. The upgrades on it are all great. Brittle armor gives it 50% armor breaking. This is huge. Freezing attack becomes one of the best armor breaking moves in the game, really, in my experience, with this being able to chunk off huge amounts of armor. If you're not running a champion, a sage is a pretty good alternative to breaking armor on some of those high armor targets that you may be struggling with to deal damage to because of this armor. On top of that, it gains the vulnerability upgrade, so now it causes 20% vulnerability to your target. This just makes it a great setup move. You can break the armor, you can set vulnerability, then someone else can come in and just absolutely demolish whoever this problem unit was for you. Lasting Cold applies chill to the enemy for 2 turns after the freeze effect. So generally, if you're using this on an enemy you're trying to focus down, you'll in most cases kill them. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes your sage is off, sort of in their own area, some enemies approach them, you need to freeze them to help protect your sage or someone else to then back away. So now, if they do have some debuff resistance, they'll be hit with chill and freeze. So they'll get an AP reduction partially from not being completely frozen, but then some further AP reduction from the chill, potentially leaving them with the ability to do nothing anyways, even if they weren't completely frozen. Unless it's chilled to the bone, definitely want this. Being able to do this as often as possible is excellent. I'm using freezing attack very, very frequently just because of how strong it is, and the ability to just really help lock down some enemies is exemplary. With the next active skill, you have Bless, very powerful buff, 30% melee weapon damage to the target for 1 turn. This is a huge damage boost to whoever you're running as your main damage dealer. This is generally champions or vanguards. I do know some players run out there with heavy magic focus, not using either. That is definitely a usable strategy, and if you're going to use one of those comps, you do not want to use Bless. This will not help you. It's melee damage only. 3 turn cooldown isn't super high. 2 AP cost, that's very low. 8 range. Very good flexibility on how to use this ability. And with Lasting Bless, increase the duration by 1, which means you only have a downtime of 1 turn really with this ability, and that's great. You can have just a constant, very frequent uptime of a 30% damage buff, and that's super good. With Lighten, you give the target an extra AP to just help take more advantage of this buff they've been given. Extra damage, more AP, potentially get an extra attack in. Guidance is probably the upgrade I take the least. You grant 20% mental debuff resistance to the target. This is useful to help protect them from getting stunned while they're blessed, I think is probably the logic behind this ability. Personally, this doesn't really come up a whole lot for me, where I don't think the 20% would be a big difference, or if you're later in the game, you're able to kill so many chunks of enemies in a given turn with the proper strategy and setup that this worry isn't super big for me, so I don't usually take this one. Mass Blessing is just good utility. Now, anyone who doesn't get targeted by Bless gets 10% of a melee weapon damage buff, so if you're bringing a defender, your sage themselves, whoever, now everyone gets a little bit more damage, and they can maybe help do some setup work and some softening of targets for your main damage dealer that much easier. Getting to the passives, Aura of Protection, I've never really been a huge fan of this one. I just think on its own, it's not that good, but if you are running items with Unbreakable Armor, this can be beneficial, because Unbreakable Armor is just one of those kinds of things in the game where a little bit of it is basically worthless. But if you find enough things to stack it and all of a sudden half your armor is unbreakable, now it's very strong. I've seen some people manage to get pieces and combo abilities where they've had their entire armor be unbreakable, and that's really, really good. I think that takes a little more work to be worth it as opposed to going for other priorities in the game, but it's a valid strategy nonetheless. So in short, really, I really only take this if I have other items to synergize with it or other characters with abilities to really synergize with this. At base, it's +3 unbreakable armor for this hero and adjacent allies, and with the upgrades of Mist, it also reduces incoming range damage, which is a very good upgrade. If I were to take this ability, mostly be for some of the upgrades on this. And with Reinforced Aura, And Keen Mind, it provides 10% physical and mental debuff resistance. That's just solid passive bonus to everyone around them. And then Extended Aura, increase the range up to 2 tiles. This is definitely one you're going to want to take if you're using the aura, because staying adjacent can be a bit troublesome at times. The last three, all resistance, just 15% of both debuff resistances. I do like to stack resistance on my sages because their support abilities are often in high demand, so I want them to be able to be called upon at any given notice. And if they're stunned, they can't really provide their support. Long Reach provides one range to non-melee active skills, so things like Bless, and when we get to Tier 3 Wall of Ice, this doesn't do a whole lot, really. There aren't a lot of ranged abilities in his kit, so I'm mixed on this one. It does have +1 Spellcraft, which is useful for hitting the Spellcraft checks, however. If you're not running an Arcanist, having the extra Spellcraft is useful, but the range itself is kind of eh. My favorite passive, though, in this tier is Favored. The first support spell is just free. Obviously, that's great. Having a free ability once per encounter is great for just AP efficiency. This is pretty self-explanatory. Moving to tier 2, we have the classic hallmark ability of Sages, Inspire. This is probably the main reason why most people run a Sage. It's one of the strongest support abilities in the entire game. You grant 2 AP to the entire team for a cost of 3, so it was only a net cost of 1 to the Sage themselves. There's no range, so it just hits everyone. It's great. 4-turn cooldown. It's a fairly high cooldown, but given how strong this ability is, it does make sense that they wouldn't want a short cooldown on this. The first upgrade is Tranquility, reduces the cooldown of everyone's abilities that are currently on cooldown, but increases the cooldown of Inspire by 1. Cooldown manipulation in this game is extremely powerful, so this is a very strong upgrade to take. With Mobilization, everyone gets +1 movement AP now, so it's not quite a net 0 cost for the caster, but it's pretty close, and having that extra movement to position yourself just a little bit better to then go on and actually use your skills is very useful for the rest of the party. Unbind removes some powerful debuffs from your party. Chill, Freeze, Slow, Stun. These are all big AP wasters, even if you're partially resistant. Previous to the bug patch that was released today, using this would cleanse them of some of these effects, but if you're partially resistant, you would still lose the AP, and you wouldn't get it back, even after being cleansed. The patch today fixed that, so you will get the AP back, so I do think this upgrade is a much higher priority now and much more useful to pick up on your sages. And lastly is Motivate Self, reduce the cooldown by 1. This is definitely something you want to pick up, especially if you're taking Tranquility, because a 5-turn cooldown is kind of nuts. If you don't take Tranquility, then it's a 3-turn cooldown, which is very strong for Inspire, so either way, you want this one. Next is Globe of Protection. This is a great ability for sages. They have some tankiness due to being medium armor, but it's nothing really great, so they still do get targeted with some frequency by the enemy AI. Granting a huge amount of temporary HP, 42 here, and it's 50 at max level, is huge. It really lets them take some extra hits and makes them very safe for the 1 to 2 turns that this will be up. With Discipline, reduce the cost by 1 down to 2. That's excellent. And Elemental Armor, it grants them some extra armor, which is just extra tankiness to this ability. If you're taking this ability, looking for tankiness, you definitely want to take this upgrade. And Soul Warding, grant yourself some extra debuff resistance of both types, 20%. That is not insignificant. Just really making sure that you're protected to all potential things that may get thrown your way. And lastly, with Dispel Magic, remove all negative effects from the hero. Very strong. If you did get hit by something, you can cast this and cleanse it off of you and get some AP back. Just a strong sort of reactionary ability to it as well, so it doesn't always have to be proactive. With Frost Armor, this one's okay. I don't think it does a whole lot to be great, but it's definitely not a bad pick, I think. I don't always take it, but I do see its merit. Frost Armor, melee attackers suffer 10% of the hero's weapon damage back to them, and it increases your armor, so it does grant some tankiness. I think that on its own may be worth taking, even if the damage reflect isn't super strong. With the upgrades, Cold Skin, you reduce vitality damage that you take by 25%. That's helpful if you are taking vitality damage. I generally avoid this because with the way I play, I very rarely take vitality damage, so it's not super good. With Hail, you gain an extra 5 unbreakable armor against ranged attacks. This is sort of what I was mentioning with the Aura of Protection, some stacking effects here. Enchanted Armor, now the damage reflection goes up to 20%. This is definitely a lot better. I'm still having mixed feelings on having to take an ability that requires your Sage to get hit, but it's kind of a if they do situation I kind of get. But I kind of avoid getting hit most of the time. And Harden, reduce armor loss by 25%. Sages don't have a whole lot of armor to begin with, so being able to hold on to it as long as possible is definitely a strong effect. Last two passives, Enchanted Weapon, 10% more weapon damage. Sages can have some decent damage, so this isn't a bad pick if you're going aggressive style with your Sage. And then Unburdened, if your HP drops to 0, all cooldowns reduced by 2. This is sort of your oh shit ability. They took some damage, now you can just cast everything, hopefully, or everything will be close to being castable again. It's just a fallback kind of skill. Finally, in Tier 3, he does have Ice Wall, which is an absolutely amazing skill. Not every Sage does have Ice Wall, so this is one thing that kinda does help him stand out a bit and make him more of a appealing aspect once you reach Tier 3. Ice Wall is a very powerful move. You can use it to block enemies into a confined space, route enemies to make them take the long way around, or just help separate them and make them split around it as they go to reach you. It has a fairly high cooldown, pretty high cost, but it's such a strong skill, I think it is absolutely worth it regardless. The first upgrade is Reinforced Wall. Don't really want this one, because enemies very rarely attack walls to begin with, so the vitality they have already is basically infinite, because they don't hit it. So if it never gets killed, why do you need more health on it? Icy Winds increase the cast range by 2, definitely useful, so you don't have to move up as far to cast this wall to route your enemies or trap them. Permafrost increase the length by 2. This is the first one you should be picking up on Ice Wall. It starts as a 3-tile wall. That's not enough. It just isn't. There's almost no situations where the 3 tiles of Ice Wall is contributing anything. 5, however, very huge, can be used to block off a lot of different paths. And the last one is Endless Winter. This one's useful because when you break the wall, or if it expires on its own, it freezes enemies adjacent to it, so you can actually get a lot of enemies frozen with this ability. Especially if you're blocking them in, they'll just run up to the wall and stand next to it, waiting for it to expire, and then they get frozen. The rest of them are passives, the first one being Soothing Winds. This is the only recovery ability that just directly heals HP to allies that isn't in the form of having to hit something, for example, or on some piece of gear, some bonus to resting. This is just when you complete an encounter, everyone heals. Due to the way health recovery is sort of stingy in this game, that's part of the challenge of the game, this is a very strong effect. The only thing that sort of deters some players is it enough to be worth the skill points? 6 HP for a defender? That's not a whole lot, but for an Arcanist, it is. So, depending on your party composition, this may have some more use. With the upgrades, it does boost up the recovery options from campfires. With Recreator, you get an extra 3 armor if you choose the armor recovery option. And with medicines, you get 10% more HP. If you're playing on lower difficulties, you get huge amounts from campfires anyways, so these aren't super great, but on like hard or very hard, where it's not as much, this can actually make a difference. On healer, you just get a flat extra HP bonus, an extra 3. I do believe at max level, this will be 7 plus 3 for 10 total, just to keep in mind if this is something you want to pick up. And with cure, the hero and each ally regain 2 vitality when choosing to recover HP at a campfire, and that's the maximum, 2. If you're taking some chip damage often, this is good. Most players aren't taking chip damage when they're taking vitality damage, however, especially when they get later into the game. I just don't think 2 is enough for this to be worth the skill point. If it was like 5, sure. Next is Master of Ice, powerful passive, plus 20% freeze and chill effectiveness, and some Ice Wall vitality. We don't really care about that. Stronger chills, stronger freezes, stronger debuff capability, very good. You're going to want this. With Frozen Power, you just increase this by an extra 10%, so now it's 30%. Definitely the first one I'd pick when I'm upgrading my Master of Ice. With Enhanced Cold, some extra weapon damage for each enemy affected by freeze or chill. With Ice Wall, you can freeze a lot of enemies potentially, so this can turn into a fairly big damage boost. With Shatter, 20% damage against units that are affected by freeze or chill, so you open with freezing attack, all your attacks going against them after that are going to get a good damage boost. And Cold Blood, immune to freeze and chill. This is helpful, but it seems very specific. I'm not sure how often my sages get frozen or chilled, so if it's something you're noticing happens to you a lot, take this. If it's something you have to think about, like, does my sage get frozen or chilled? That's probably a sign that you should maybe avoid it. For the last 3 passives, these are all really good. The best one, I think, is Wish of Death. Leo will gain 1 AP when any enemy unit dies. He does not have to be one to kill them, so when your main damage dealer is going around getting a bunch of kills, he still gets AP. This is an excellent ability. Really helps him cross the map to run up to enemies to help weaken them if your damage dealer can't, one-tap them or something and you're trying to be as AP efficient as possible. Or it's very useful in the end game. When you're picking up soul fragments, you can have your sage run, pick up a soul fragment, they lose their AP, then you go kill stuff, and you go back to your sage and all of a sudden he has 6 more AP and he can go pick up a second soul fragment in the same turn. Sage's Act is probably one of my biggest soul fragment gatherers because of this ability right here. It's an amazing skill just for that utility alone. Next up is Mysticism. If you do kill an enemy, you get some cooldown reduction. And like I said, sages, they may not get kills super often, but they do get kills. So you can get this to trigger with some level of frequency, and getting Inspire 1 turn sooner or Bless 1 turn sooner, that's a big deal. Last up is Divine. If your HP drops to 0, you just get a big boost of HP back. If you notice your sages are zeroing out on HP, if your Leo is getting hurt a lot, you want to take this. But hopefully, by the time you reach this stage of the game with Global Protection, with Ice Wall, your party is fully developed, you won't need to take this, ideally. And that covers it for Sir Leodegrance. He has a solid skill tree because he's a sage. They're just solid by nature, strong support abilities, and you definitely won't do poorly by bringing him. Unfortunately, he is just sort of power cut by other sages, so I do think you are better bringing the other sages to your party, but he's definitely still a strong option by the nature of being a sage. Very basic skill tree. If you've seen my other skill breakdowns, you probably heard some repetition with this video, but I just wanted to cover him for some players that may have just unlocked him and they're not sure what he has in store for them. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you, and thanks for watching.